I sat on the couch, the mug warm in my hands, and watched him pace. After 7 minutes, he rang again. Then he spoke into the intercom. "Look, I don't know what they told you, but there's more to the story," Jason said. "I just want to explain my part, please." I set the mug down and turned the intercom on. "Jason," I said, "this is not the place or time." He sighed. "I'm not here to fight. Look, it wasn't supposed to go like this. I didn't know half of what was happening." "You handed something to a notary after my father died," I said. "I saw it, on video." Silence. I didn't know the exact date," Jason said. "Charlene said everything was sorted, that your dad had planned it that way." "You know what the footage shows," I replied. "So does the court." "I was scared," he said. "Charlene told me we had to act fast or everything would go into probate." "Jason," I said calmly, "do not try to make yourself a victim in a story where you committed fraud." He opened his mouth, closed it again, the tulips drooped in his hand. "I'm done talking," I said, and disconnected. I documented the visit, stored the intercom recording, filed it all. This wasn't revenge. This was protocol. By the end of the week, my lawyer called. "They're panicking," Ms. Lynn said. "Charlene's legal team just sent over a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" I asked. "They're calling it a discretionary family trust agreement," she replied. "But really, it's hush money." I raised an eyebrow. "How much?" I asked. $750,000, Ms. Lynn said. "On the condition that you drop all legal claims and sign a mutual non-disclosure agreement." I laughed, not a loud laugh. A small, stunned kind of laugh that gets stuck in the throat. "They think this ends with a check?" I asked. "They're hoping you'll be bought off," Ms. Lynn said. "It's common in these cases, cheap way out." "Draft my reply," I said. "Sure," she replied. "What tone would you like?" "Direct," I said, "but not angry. Make sure it includes the line, 'You already erased me once. I'm not disappearing quietly.'" Ms. Lynn chuckled. "You've got a gift with words." "No," I said. "I've just had a lot of time to sit in silence." The days that followed blurred into legal filings, strategic meetings, and quiet reflection. I was working from my kitchen table again. My plants had started growing wild, thriving, it seemed, in the wake of clarity. One evening, I found myself staring at an old photo on my bookshelf. My dad and I, on the dock at the lake house. I was maybe 10. He had his arm around me, and we were both squinting into the sun, our expressions identical. Tired, a little amused, kind. It reminded me why I was doing all this. Not to shame them, not to punish them, but to set the record straight. Because if I let them rewrite my role in his life, they'd do it again. To someone else, in some other story. And if they were willing to erase my presence while I was still breathing, I could only imagine what they'd do once my voice was gone. No, not this time. That week, Ms. Lynn filed the formal fraud complaint. The footage was entered into preliminary evidence. The judge approved it for review. Things were moving fast now. The irony, they thought I would crumble, that I'd retreat, lick my wounds, accept whatever scraps were thrown at me. But I wasn't the girl who stayed quiet anymore. I was the woman who kept receipts. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not just in temperature, but in feeling. Wood paneling, stone-faced officials, and the stale hush of anticipation. It was the kind of cold that seeped into your sleeves and sat quietly on your skin, not dramatic, just persistent. I wore black, not for mourning, but for armor. Charlene sat 2 rows ahead, in a cream blazer that looked too bright against the gray surroundings. Jason fidgeted beside her. Evie wasn't present. Her absence didn't surprise me. My lawyer, Miss Lynn, tapped my elbow gently. "They're about to call the footage," Ms. Lynn whispered. I nodded. The judge cleared his throat. Let's proceed with the defense's submission. Exhibit A. Dated surveillance footage from Mr. Merritt's residence covering the period in question. The courtroom dimmed slightly as the monitor was brought to life. No one said a word as the footage began. There I was, on screen, walking into the living room with my father, his voice faint but audible. "I need to get these papers done soon," Dad had said on the footage. "You're the one I trust." We watched him sip tea, nodding as I read through draft documents aloud. Footage switched, a new date stamp. Me helping him into bed, fluffing the pillows, the two of us laughing softly as we argued about which James Stewart film was better. Another cut. Him at his desk, pen in hand, me by his side, pointing to a page. He signs. He smiles. I place the paper in an envelope, then the screen flickers. Different footage now. Charlene entering the study alone, rummaging, opening a drawer, pulling out a folder, leafing through pages, the date stamp, 3 days after his death. Another cut, Jason, in the same room, handing a document to a notary. The notary looks nervous. No conversation is heard, but the date stamp, again, tells its own story. The screen goes dark. A long silence followed. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Merritt," the judge said to Charlene, "do you maintain your position that Mr. Merritt revised the will independently, in a sound state of mind?" Charlene's lips parted. She blinked. "I believe he did," Charlene said. "He told me. We had talked." "Please answer directly," the judge said. Charlene swallowed. "Yes, I do." The judge looked unimpressed. "Mr. Jason McLean," the judge continued, "were you aware of the date of Mr. Merritt's passing when you presented the revised document to the notary?" Jason adjusted his tie. "I thought it was still within the legal window. I didn't. Charlene handled most of it." The judge cut in. "So to be clear, you witnessed and facilitated the notarization of a document allegedly authored after the decedent had already passed." Jason's mouth opened and closed like a fish gulping air. "Yes," he finally admitted. "But I didn't realize." "That will be enough," the judge said. Across the courtroom, I saw my uncle lower his eyes. I hadn't even realized he'd shown up until that moment. Testimony continued. My father's former assistant was called. She confirmed he had spoken of updating the will, to make sure everything goes to his daughter. His nurse testified that I visited regularly in the final months, that I brought meals, sat with him, read aloud when his eyesight worsened. She also testified that Charlene barely visited after the cancer returned. The lawyer who had originally drafted the prior will, the one naming me as majority heir, took the stand next. He said my father had called to make an appointment to finalize revisions. The meeting never happened, but the intent, the pattern, everything pointed to one conclusion. Ms. Lynn rested our case. I sat through every minute. Not once did I interrupt. Not once did I flinch. I didn't smile, didn't glare, just breathed. When the judge called for a recess before rendering a decision, I stepped out into the hallway and sat on a wooden bench. Charlene walked by me on her way to the restroom. She didn't meet my eyes. Jason sat on a nearby bench, elbows on knees, hands locked together, as if in prayer. I didn't say a word to either of them. I didn't need to. When we reconvened, the courtroom seemed even colder. But this time, it didn't touch me. The judge spoke firmly. The court finds the revised will to be invalid, based on extensive and compelling evidence of fraud. The prior will, as witnessed and corroborated by supporting testimony and documentation, shall stand. I blinked slowly. No cheers, no outbursts. Just truth, arriving with the quiet finality of a gavel's echo. Effective immediately, the judge continued. Ms. Merritt is recognized as the rightful heir to the Merritt family business holdings and the lakefront property in Lanesboro. I glanced at Miss Lynn. She nodded once. I didn't smile. There was a tiredness in me that no verdict could undo. Justice is not always triumphant. Sometimes, it's simply necessary. As we left the courthouse, reporters were waiting. I kept my head down. Ms. Lane shielded me as best she could. One of them shouted, "How does it feel to win?" I didn't answer. Because winning wasn't the right word. Winning meant celebration, fireworks, a parade. This felt more like exhale, like setting down a weight I'd carried for too long. That night, I returned to my apartment, turned off my phone, lit a candle, sat in silence, and cried, not for the pain of betrayal, but for the man who'd trusted me. The man whose voice was now quiet, forever. And who, despite it all, had tried up to his last breath to do the right thing. I didn't cry because I lost him. I cried because I finally defended what we built, and in doing so I got a small part of him back. The lake house sat at the edge of dawn, wrapped in a pale mist that drifted lazily across the shoreline like an old memory. My father used to say, "Mornings here felt like time paused just for us." Now it paused for me alone. I stood on the porch with the key in my hand for several long minutes before I unlocked the door. It had been months since I'd stepped foot inside. The legal battles, the hearings, the press, everything had pulled me away from the one place that had always felt like sanctuary. But now the fight was over. The door creaked open, and I was greeted by stillness. Not the kind that feels eerie, but the kind that holds its breath, like the house was waiting for me to come home. I stepped inside. Same pinewood floors, same old leather armchair by the window, same faint scent of cedar and something floral, maybe the dried lavender bunches that used to hang in the kitchen. "Hey, Dad," I whispered. I wasn't expecting an answer, of course, but my voice felt like it filled something, like it gave shape to the quiet. I walked slowly, room to room, my fingers trailing over the banister where he used to tap rhythmically while climbing the stairs, past the bookshelf where we kept his first edition Hemingway, spine cracked, margins filled with pencil notes he refused to erase. Every corner held an echo. Laughter from that New Year's Eve we danced barefoot in the living room, his coughs when he tried to fix the old heater by himself and inhaled too much dust. The clink of coffee mugs, and the way he'd always mispronounce biscotti, just to make me roll my eyes. In the bedroom, the sheets had been replaced, the dust cleared, probably by the estate's temporary caretakers. But the photograph of us fishing sat untouched on the nightstand. My face beaming with braces and 2 big sunglasses, his hand resting proudly on my shoulder. I sank onto the bed and let myself feel it. Not the anger, not the betrayal, just the ache, the absence. And then, curiosity pulled me to the bookshelf again. My father had a habit of tucking things into books, letters, receipts, photos, little things he didn't want to lose, but didn't want to explain either. I pulled out The Old Man and the Sea. Nothing. Tuesdays with Maury. Still nothing. But when I picked up The Art of War, a worn envelope slid out and landed softly on the floor. It was addressed in his handwriting. Just my name. No last name. No date. Just, "To my girl." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single page, written in his blocky, imperfect script. "Don't let them take from you what you've earned. You were always my first choice. I'm sorry I didn't protect you better. But I knew you'd protect yourself. Keep building. Love. Dad." I didn't cry right away. I just stared at the words like they might rearrange themselves, like maybe there was more hiding between the lines. Then it hit me, not like a punch, but like a long-held breath finally being released. The tears came, not from pain, but from release. I held the letter to my chest and sobbed into the stillness, into the memory of the man who raised me to be strong, but never realized just how strong I'd have to be. I wasn't crying because I was hurt anymore. I was crying because I was free, because justice, as draining as it had been, had given me this moment, this house, this letter, and I hadn't lost everything. I had found something too. When the sun broke fully through the windows, casting gold across the wooden floors, I stood up and opened every curtain in the house. No more hiding. I spent the next week settling in, not just physically, but emotionally. I unpacked slowly, replaced the photos, took down Charlene's gaudy wall art that had been hung during the estate's brief chaos. I found peace in the mundane fronts. Cooking with Dad's old cast-iron skillet, sweeping the porch, feeding the birds that gathered at the feeder we built together. The business, too, began to shift under my guidance. I held my first board meeting via video call from the sunroom. Some faces were cautious, others skeptical, a few quietly relieved, but I made my position clear. Integrity wasn't a branding tactic. It was going to be the foundation. We renamed one of the mentorship initiatives my father had once dreamed about, but never implemented. I called it Merit's First Choice. When someone asked why the name, I smiled and said, because he believed in second chances. But more than that, he believed in making the right one first. I never told them about the letter. That was mine. In the evenings, I'd sit by the lake with a cup of chamomile, watching the horizon blur into itself. Sometimes, I'd talk to him. Guess what, Dad? We finally updated that firmware you always said was clunky. Or, I fired that supplier you hated. The one who kept overcharging us. Sometimes, I'd just sit. Let the breeze brush past me like a hand on my shoulder. The house had changed. It was quieter, but not emptier. I filled it with my own touches. Softer lighting, handmade rugs from local artists, and a journal on the entry table where guests could write thoughts or memories when they visited. There was no plaque announcing victory, no trophies. Just a home. Mine. Ours. And for the first time in a long time, I slept soundly. Not because everything was perfect, but because I no longer had to fight for the truth. It had already spoken. And it had spoken in my favor. The lake reflected the late summer sky like a mirror, pale blue streaked with drifting clouds, as if even the heavens had decided to slow down. The wind hummed through the pine trees as I poured coffee into mismatched mugs and arranged a small tray of almond cookies on the kitchen table. They weren't homemade. I hadn't had time to bake. But today wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. The article had come out that morning. Daughter wins landmark inheritance case through security footage. Byline, Nora Elridge, The Sentinel. It was front-page news in the Sunday paper and trending online by noon. A photo of me, not in court, not from years ago, but one Nora had asked to take at the lake house. I'd worn a soft blue sweater, stood on the dock barefoot, and held the railing with both hands. Her interview had been short. She asked, "Is there anything you want to say, now that it's over?" And I replied, without rehearsing, "The camera didn't lie. Neither did I." That was the quote printed beneath the headline. Nothing more, nothing less. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. Let the record show. Charlene and Jason had retreated from public life. No press conferences, no countersuits. Just silence. The kind that settles over people who finally realize the lie didn't hold. There had been murmurs of appeal, of trying again, but their lawyer must have told them what I already knew. It was over. Some relatives reached out after the article. Aunt Marlene left a voicemail, apologizing for assuming the worst. Cousin Rebecca sent flowers with a card that read, "I'm sorry I didn't ask your side sooner." But I didn't rush to answer them. For the first time in my life, I realized I didn't owe anyone anything, not even my explanation. Forgiveness is not an obligation, it's a choice. And I'd choose carefully. That evening, I opened the front door just as Mr. Bader, my father's old fishing buddy, stepped onto the porch. He held up a bottle of cider and said, "Thought I'd stop by before sunset. Hope I'm not early." I smiled. I said, "You're right on time." More cars arrived one by one. Not many. Just the ones who mattered. My mentor from college, Professor Talley, who had read the article and emailed simply, "You made truth look graceful." Sarah, the barista from the corner cafe who used to slip me notes of encouragement during the case. My lawyer, Mr. Alton, who came with his wife and daughter. A bright-eyed girl who asked, "Is this the house from the story?" I laughed and said, "It is." She ran to the dock, arms stretched wide, like she was flying. I didn't call it a party. That word felt too loud, too easy. This was something quieter, warmer, a remembering. In the living room, I laid out finger foods and extra blankets. I left out a guest book beside the fireplace with a pen in the crease, and one by one they wrote. One entry read, "Some fights are won with fists, others with truth, yours with grace." Outside, fireflies blinked in slow rhythm. Inside, the light from the hearth flickered gently. There were no toasts, no speeches, just conversations that flowed naturally. Stories that didn't need to be told in defense, just shared. Mr. Bader leaned over and said, "Your dad would have been proud, you know." I nodded. "I think he is." Later, when the guests had left and the last car disappeared down the gravel road, I stepped outside onto the porch with a blanket draped over my shoulders. The air was crisp, the lake still. The moon reflected across the water like a quiet seal of approval. I sat in the rocking chair, the same one my father used to sit in with his coffee. The same one I once avoided because it reminded me too much of absence. Now it felt like arrival. I pulled out the article again and read the final paragraph aloud to the night. In an age where truth is often obscured by power, one woman proved that silence can be broken by stillness, and that justice sometimes looks like a grainy video file that speaks louder than any lie. I folded the paper neatly and pressed it into the back of my notebook. Then I whispered into the dark. They lied to bury me, but the truth doesn't stay buried. It was watching the whole time. And then I closed my eyes. For once, not to escape, but to rest. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to subscribe for good luck. The mahogany table felt colder than it looked. I sat at its edge, straight-backed and silent, trying to ignore the glances from across the room. My stepmother, Charlene, sipped from a paper coffee cup with too much cream. My cousins, Jason and Eve, looked bored, fiddling with their phones. And Uncle Marvin was half asleep beside me, as if we were all gathered for a routine family update instead of the reading of my father's will. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. They say, if you've ever been betrayed by family, hitting like brings peace, subscribing brings clarity, and commenting brings karma to those who wronged you. Try it, and tell me where you're watching from. Anyways, the law office smelled faintly of dust and old money. Books lined the shelves like silent witnesses, and the only light came from a single green glass desk lamp. The lawyer, Mr. Hartley, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat with all the gravity of a man preparing to drop a stone into still water. "I'll begin with the formal statement of bequeathment," Mr. Hartley said. "Per the most recent will, dated April 2nd, the entirety of the estate of Mr. Douglas Merritt is to be passed equally among Charlene Merritt, Jason Merritt, and Eve Merritt." My breath caught. "Wait," I said, not loudly, more like a reflex. "What?" Charlene smiled. Not a wide smile, just the kind you give someone when you've already won the game but still want them to know it. "The lake house," I said, my voice shaking now. "The company shares. Dad said, he told me. He said I'd be the one to oversee it all." Mr. Hartley hesitated. Charlene leaned in and said, "Your father changed the will last month, sweetheart. After your absence. You weren't there." Jason added, "Yeah, we thought you didn't want to be involved anymore." Eve didn't say a word. She just looked away. "But I was there," I said. "I was with him 3 weeks ago." Mr. Hartley blinked. "According to the documents your family provided, your father stated he hadn't heard from you in over a year. That's why the distribution was adjusted." That word, adjusted, hit me like a slap. "Adjusted?" I repeated. "He and I were close. I brought him soup when he had that awful cold in March. We watched Casablanca together. He asked me if I remembered how to make his cinnamon toast. He said—" My voice trailed off as my hands trembled beneath the table. Charlene reached into her purse and pulled out a folded photocopy of something. "See for yourself," Charlene said, handing it to Mr. Hartley. He signed everything personally, and the notary confirmed it. This is what he wanted. Mr. Hartley studied the page, frowning. Then he turned to me. "I'm very sorry," Mr. Hartley said. "But legally, unless there's reason to dispute the authenticity of the document, this will supersede any prior arrangements." There was a sound in my ears like wind through a tunnel. I barely heard the rest. Jason tapping his pen against the table. Eve whispering something to Charlene. My uncle muttering about getting lunch. I sat frozen. I remembered my father's hands, scarred from years of woodworking, steady even at 72, reaching for mine the last time I saw him. I remembered his voice saying, "You've always been the one I trusted. You know that?" And now? This? I didn't say anything else. I just stood, slowly, and walked out of the room. The corridor outside was lined with photos of stern men in suits, old partners, founding lawyers, people who probably never had to defend their place in their own family. I leaned against the wall, forcing back the tears. I wasn't going to cry, not here, not in front of them. Charlene's voice floated out from the meeting room. "She always was dramatic," Charlene said. Jason laughed. I walked faster. But even as I reached the front door, even as I stepped into the sunlight, one thought refused to leave me. They're lying. Something didn't add up. My father never would have cut me out without telling me. Not without explanation. And certainly not while we were still in touch, close even. I pulled out my phone and opened the last message from him. It was dated 2 weeks before he passed. "Dad. Picked up that old maple syrup you liked. Still in the pantry. Come by soon, okay? Me. This Sunday. Want me to bring lemon bars? Dad. Always." I stared at it until my screen dimmed. That wasn't the text of a man estranged from his daughter. Something was off. And then the memory came back. So vivid I almost gasped. The gentle blinking blue light in the corner of Dad's living room. The same light that had been blinking since he installed the new camera system last year, after someone tried to break into the shed. The security footage. I stood there on the sidewalk, people brushing past me on their lunch break, cars rushing by. They lied, but the footage hadn't. I didn't sleep that night. The words echoed over and over in my mind. "Your father said he hadn't heard from you in over a year." I kept seeing Mr. Hartley's face, the way his expression turned from formal to distant the moment he read that clause, as if I were a stranger to my own father, as if I'd abandoned him. But I hadn't. I opened my laptop at 3 a.m. and pulled up every message we'd exchanged in the last year. There were dozens. Photos of my dog, updates about his health, Dad asking if I still had the recipe for his favorite beef stew. I scrolled through each one like a defense attorney preparing for trial. Then I opened my voicemail archive. "Dad. Hey, kiddo. The maple leaves are turning early this year. Makes me think of your mom and those awful family photos she made us take. Dad. Just checking in. I finally found those VHS tapes. Casablanca is still in one piece. Dad. Soup was perfect. Don't let anyone marry you unless they can cook like that." My stomach tightened. I played that last one twice, then again. The timestamp read, March 11, 3 weeks before he died. I remembered the day clearly. It had snowed lightly. I brought over split pea soup and lemon bars. He made fun of the slippers I wore. We sat on the couch for 2 hours watching Bogart and Bergman fall in and out of love. And at the end, just before I left, he said something that stuck with me. "You know," Dad said, "I need to update some papers soon. You've always been the one I trusted." He said it like a sigh, like it had taken him years to admit out loud. Now they wanted me to believe that same man rewrote his will to exclude me entirely, and didn't mention a word of it during that visit. No, absolutely not. I clicked over to my saved email drafts. I had one I'd never sent, typed the night he died. I couldn't bring myself to hit send. It was just a few lines. "I miss you already. You were the only one who saw me clearly." Even then, I had known that something about our bond was rare. Quiet, yes, but real. Why would he erase me? He wouldn't. But someone else might. I thought about Charlene's smirk in that room, Jason's scripted words, Eve's refusal to look me in the eye. They were too calm, too rehearsed. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. There had to be proof, something objective, something they couldn't control or rewrite. And then I saw it. Not a vision, just a flicker in memory, the blinking light. Dad's house had security cameras. Not just one by the front door, but a whole system, installed last year after someone stole a package and left cigarette butts on the porch. He was proud of that system, called it his digital watchdog. He used to joke. Now I don't even have to get up to see who's knocking. Age has its perks. I remembered helping him set the password, helping him test the motion detectors. I even hid behind the couch once to see if it would catch me on playback. It had. Which meant, if the system had been running, it would have caught everything. My visits, our conversations, maybe even more. I sat up straight. If the will had truly been changed a month before his death, there might be footage from that day. Of who came and went, of who was in the house, of who wasn't. And maybe, if I was lucky, the camera had caught something they didn't want anyone to see. I grabbed my phone and called Mr. Hartley's office. A receptionist answered. Law offices of Hartley and Kim. This is Ava Merritt, I said. I need to request temporary supervised access to my father's property. His name was Douglas Merritt. There may be evidence in the home. The woman paused. I'll pass this to Mr. Hartley and have him get back to you. Please do, I said. It's urgent. She agreed, and I hung up. Then I sat in silence, my heart pounding in my chest. Because if that footage still existed, it wasn't just my word against theirs anymore. The truth had eyes, and I was ready to let it speak. The key clicked in the lock like it had every time I came to visit, but this time it echoed. Hollow. The house smelled like closed windows and untouched air. I stepped into the foyer beneath the watchful eye of the same brass chandelier my father always called unnecessarily dramatic. The floor creaked under my boots as I walked through the silence. For a moment, I half expected him to call from the den, asking if I brought cookies or bad news. But the house stayed quiet. Mr. Hartley had arranged everything. As executor and legal counsel, he granted me temporary supervised access under the justification of investigating inconsistencies in the will. He didn't say it aloud, but I could see it in his eyes. He believed me now. Or at least, he didn't trust them anymore either. The paralegal stayed outside, giving me privacy within legal boundaries. I moved quickly, heading toward the study, where I remembered Dad had installed the security system's central unit. The router still blinked faintly, and beside it, tucked just beneath the lowest drawer, was the backup drive, still warm. I whispered, "You brilliant old man," as I pulled it free. He always said paper trails could be forged, but data told its own story. The drive was a nondescript black box, unmarked, except for a piece of masking tape on the bottom with his handwriting. Property of Doug, no snooping, Charlene. My lips twisted into a grim smile. Back at my apartment, I set the drive gently on my desk, like it was a living thing, something fragile and sacred. I hadn't even changed clothes. I just booted up my old desktop tower, faster than my laptop, and connected the drive. A login screen appeared. I entered the password, Casablanca 2020. I laughed under my breath. That had been our movie. The footage started populating immediately. Dozens of files, all marked by date and camera angle. I clicked into the front room footage from March 11th, the last day I saw him. There I was, coat dusted in snow, carrying a grocery bag in one hand, a thermos of soup in the other. My father opened the door. He looked tired, but he smiled. He always smiled when he saw me. I watched myself step inside. I skipped forward, us on the couch, talking, laughing. The audio wasn't clear, but I knew what we were saying. I remembered pointing at the TV and teasing him for still owning a VCR. Then I found the kitchen camera feed. There he was, handing me a folder, me flipping through pages, a pen, my father signing something. He touched my hand after, I remember that too. His hand had been warm and shaky. The timestamp was clear, March 11, 3:43 p.m., 3 weeks before his death. I clicked faster now, room by room, day by day, and then something shifted. March 29, my father had already passed. The obituary had already run. Yet here was Charlene, stepping through the front door with a key she shouldn't have had anymore. She wore gloves, carried a leather purse, and moved quickly, like she didn't want to be seen. She went to the study. I watched, horrified, as she opened his filing cabinet, pulled folders, shuffled papers. She took a document from her purse, laid it next to one she'd pulled from Dad's files, and compared signatures. Then she made a phone call. I couldn't hear the words, but her face, smug, urgent. She knew the cameras were there. She just didn't care, or she forgot. I switched to the den camera from the next day. March 30. Jason, my cousin, was there. He wasn't grieving. He was grinning. He handed something, a folder or an envelope, to a man I didn't recognize. The man looked official. Notary badge on his coat. They all shook hands. Jason offered him a bottle of wine from the kitchen. Then the man opened a case, pulled out a notary stamp, and pressed it to the paper. The timestamp burned into my eyes. March 30, 2 days after my father died. I hit pause. My whole body was trembling. They hadn't just lied about me being absent. They hadn't just manipulated the will. They fabricated a new version after my father was already gone, and they notarized it with help. Fraud, document tampering, possibly more. I sat back. My heart beat a drum in my throat. They had erased me, completely, strategically. But they forgot something fundamental. Cameras don't lie. They had counted on silence, on grief making me obedient, on the world believing their version of events because it was cleaner, simpler. They underestimated the one person Dad always trusted to look deeper. I created a backup of the drive immediately, then another. One would go to Mr. Hartley, one to a third-party digital forensics firm, and one would remain in my possession. I didn't sleep that night either, but not out of despair this time. This time, I didn't cry. I documented. I wrote down times, dates, actions. I built a timeline, a case, a map of betrayal. And when I closed my laptop at dawn, the sun crawling up between buildings across the street, I said it aloud, just once, softly, to no one. They thought I wouldn't fight. But I would, not for revenge, for truth. Because my father didn't raise a fool. He raised a daughter who watched, who remembered, who kept the footage. And now it was their turn to be seen. When I called Mr. Hartley's office to request another meeting, his assistant hesitated. I could hear it in her voice, a thin layer of surprise, maybe confusion. "Mr. Hartley's calendar is quite full this week," she said. "May I ask what this is in reference to?" "It's regarding new evidence related to the will," I replied. There was a pause, then, "How does Thursday at 10 a.m. sound?" Perfect. When I walked back into the law office 3 days later, it felt different. I had worn black at the reading of the will. This time, I wore steel gray. No frills, no grief on my sleeves. Mr. Hartley stood when I entered. His eyes were cautious, polite. "Miss Merritt," he said, "I must admit, I wasn't expecting to see you so soon." "I figured," I replied. I took my seat across from him and placed a small black USB drive on the table between us. "Before we continue with the estate transfer, there's something you should see." His eyes dropped to the drive like it might bite. He reached forward slowly, then inserted it into his laptop. A password prompt popped up. "Password?" Mr. Hartley asked. "Casablanca 2020, I said. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Your father's favorite?" I nodded. He entered it. The screen lit up with thumbnail previews. I had preloaded the exact clips. 3 from March 11, 2 from March 29. and one from March 30. All dates stamped. All clear. No room for misinterpretation. Mr. Hartley clicked on the first clip. There was my father on screen, signing papers while I sat beside him. Our hands steady, our conversation warm. He leaned forward in his chair. Next, Charlene, rummaging through drawers she didn't belong in. Then, Jason, with the notary, and the stamp, and the handshake. No one spoke in the room as the video played. The only sound was the whir of Mr. Hartley's laptop fan. By the end, his hand had gone to his mouth. When the final clip ended, I closed the laptop screen gently. Mr. Hartley sat frozen, hands clasped in front of him, knuckles white. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, quietly, he said, "This completely invalidates the version of the will they presented." I didn't respond. He sat back, removed his glasses, cleaned them with a cloth that trembled slightly in his hand. "I need to ask," Mr. Hartley said, voice lower now. "Where exactly did this footage come from?" "My father's home security system," I said. "The backup drive. It was labeled. Password protected. I accessed it under the temporary order you authorized." He gave a slow nod. "That was well played." "I didn't come to play," I replied. He smiled faintly. It faded quickly. "This is fraud," Mr. Hartley said, "blatant and prosecutable. But more than that, it's a betrayal of your father's stated intentions. I remember him telling me about updating his estate documents. I just assumed he hadn't gotten around to it." I said nothing. "Let him sit with it. I need to confer with our firm's legal team," he said. "But there's no question we'll need to halt the estate distribution process. I'll file an injunction today." "Good," I said. Mr. Hartley looked at me for a long moment. "I apologize," Mr. Hartley said finally. "At the reading I doubted you. I let their certainty sway me." "I understand," I said. "They were convincing." He nodded, more to himself than to me. "Miss Merritt, would you be willing to pursue legal action?" I looked at him, really looked at him. He didn't ask as a man seeking drama or spectacle. He asked as a man who had just realized he'd nearly become complicit in a lie. "Yes," I said. "Good," he said again, gathering his papers. "We'll need to get sworn affidavits, chain of custody validation on the footage, probably a digital forensics expert." "I've already backed up the files," I said. 2 copies. One is with a third-party firm that specializes in timestamp verification." He stopped moving, stared at me. "You were prepared," he said. "No," I replied. "I was erased. That makes you methodical." He exhaled. "This is going to get messy." "I'm not afraid of messy," I said. Then I added, "But I'm not doing this for revenge." He looked up, surprised. "I'm doing it for the truth," I said. "My father trusted me, and someone tried to rewrite that. I'm not letting them." Mr. Hartley leaned back in his chair. "There are people who say that," he said, "who claim it's not about revenge. But in your case, I believe you." I nodded once. He stood and offered his hand. "Let's make this right," Mr. Hartley said. I took it. Let the truth do the talking. Outside, the sky was cold and silver. I walked down the steps of the firm's building and into a wind that smelled like rain. My coat snapped around my legs. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. They hadn't expected me to come back. They hadn't expected me to fight. But the footage didn't blink, and neither would I. It started 2 days after the lawyer filed the injunction. At first, I thought it was a pocket dial. A voicemail from Charlene's number. No message, just silence. A soft clinking of glass in the background. Then came another one. This time, her voice.
We can fix this as a family, Charlene said. Let's not blow everything up over misunderstandings. Call me, sweetheart. Sweetheart. I didn't even know she still had my number. I didn't reply. Instead, I saved the voicemail, created a new folder in my digital records. Attempted contact, post-injunction. Time-stamped, dated, labeled. By the end of the day, I had 3 more voicemails. The third one was shakier. Charlene said, "Your father wouldn't have wanted this. We're all grieving. I think if we just sat down, just talked, we could come to a better understanding." An understanding. That was rich. By the end of the week, the calls slowed, but the door knocks started.
I was making tea one afternoon when the buzzer rang. I checked the camera feed from my phone and sighed. Jason, my cousin, my father's sister's son. He was holding a bouquet of bright yellow tulips, the kind you pick up in a rush from a gas station. I let it ring out. He waited.